Episode 9, A Cold Return. Eli and Evelyn left Black Hollow. Just as the morning fog began to lift, the stone box containing the curse tucked safely in the back seat of Evelyn's car. Their destination was a remote forest miles from Black Hollow, a place Eli had marked on his map as an isolated stretch of land where no one was likely to stumble upon it. The plan was to bury the box deep in an unmarked area, away from any path, road, or wandering visitor. As they drove, Evelyn broke the silence. "Do you think this will work? I mean, even the founders failed to contain it properly." Eli kept his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "We've severed the ties that bound it to Black Hollow. This box should hold it long enough for us to bury it somewhere it can't harm anyone. It's as safe as we can make it." But despite his confident words, a feeling of dread lingered. The shadow was gone, but a strange, unsettling quiet seemed to fill the void it left behind. Hours later, they reached their destination, a dense, uncharted forest stretching far and wide, surrounded by a labyrinth of thorn-covered shrubs. Evelyn glanced at the map Eli had drawn up, her brows knitting as she surveyed the unwelcoming terrain. "Are you sure about this place?" Eli nodded. "The thicker, the better. The deeper we go, the less chance anyone has of finding it." With shovels in hand, they ventured deep into the forest. The sounds of civilization quickly faded, replaced by the faint rustling of leaves and the calls of distant animals. As they walked, Eli noticed a strange sensation, as though the forest itself were watching them. Shadows shifted with an unnatural rhythm, the trees twisting their branches like claws reaching out to pull them back. After nearly an hour of hiking, they found a secluded clearing encircled by gnarled trees. The light barely reached through the canopy, casting everything in an eerie, gray half-light. They began digging. The soil was dense and resistant, as though the forest itself was reluctant to allow the box to be buried. Finally, they reached a depth they felt was sufficient. Eli lifted the stone box from his backpack, feeling its weight in his hands and soul. Placing it carefully in the hole, he hesitated, a sense of finality settling over him. Evelyn touched his arm. "It's time to let it go." With a reluctant nod, Eli began covering the box with soil, his hands moving faster with each shovel of dirt. Once the hole was filled, he tamped down the earth, scattering leaves and debris over the spot to disguise it. They stood in silence, breathing heavily, staring at the freshly disturbed earth. Evelyn finally broke the silence, her voice filled with conviction. "It's done. Black Hollow is safe." But as they turned to leave, a faint voice echoed through the clearing, so quiet it could have been a trick of the wind. "You cannot bury what has already taken root." Eli and Evelyn froze, exchanging a glance filled with dread. But there was no one else in the forest, no sign of any presence. They hurried back to the path, both of them haunted by the memory of that chilling voice. Days passed after their return to Black Hollow, and life in the town seemed to settle into a new rhythm. The townsfolk were more at ease, and the pervasive sense of dread that had hung over the town had finally lifted. People spoke openly, laughter filled the streets, and life seemed to blossom in a way Eli hadn't seen before. Eli decided to stay in Black Hollow a little longer to ensure there were no lingering remnants of the curse. He took up residence in an inn near the town's edge, spending his days visiting familiar spots, watching for any signs of the shadow's return. One night, as he sat alone in his room, the sensation of being watched crept over him again. It was subtle at first, a faint prickle at the back of his neck, but as the minutes passed, the feeling intensified. He turned sharply, eyes scanning the room, but nothing seemed out of place. Then, without warning, the light flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Eli's heart raced as he fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers trembling as he flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the corners of the room, but there was no sign of anyone else. Suddenly, a shape appeared in the corner of his vision, a dark, wraith-like figure standing by the window, its face obscured by shadow. Eli's breath hitched as he took a step back, his mind racing. He had seen this figure before. It was similar to the shadow, but felt different. More malevolent, as though it were fueled by something even darker. The figure didn't move, but Eli could feel its gaze fixed on him, its presence filling the room with an oppressive weight. His voice barely a whisper, he spoke, "Who, what are you?" The figure's voice was low, a deep rumble that seemed to reverberate through the walls. "I am the hunger left behind, the shadow of a shadow. You thought you could bury me, but darkness does not die. It only waits." Eli's pulse quickened as he realized what he was dealing with. The creature before him wasn't the shadow they had fought, it was a remnant, a piece of the curse left behind, a parasite feeding on the traces of darkness that still lingered in Black Hollow. With a surge of determination, he reached for the protective amulet Evelyn had given him before they entered the Whispering Woods. He held it out, its faint glow casting a protective aura around him. "Whatever you are, you don't belong here. You're a fragment, nothing more." The figure recoiled slightly, but its voice remained steady, dripping with malice. "You may have cast out the shadow, but you cannot erase me. I am bound to this place as surely as you are tied to your past." And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving Eli alone in the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The following morning, he sought out Evelyn, recounting the night's encounter. Her face grew pale as he described the figure, her hands clenched tightly around her amulet. This doesn't make sense," she murmured. "The curse should be gone. The shadow was the source, and we banished it." "Maybe," Eli replied, "but there's something left behind. It's like a scar, a lingering wound. It might be weaker than the shadow, but it's still here, feeding on what remains." They both fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over them. For as much as they had done to free Black Hollow, the curse was resilient, and the remnants of it were stubbornly clinging to the town. Evelyn looked out over the town, her face filled with determination. "We need to find a way to cleanse Black Hollow entirely, down to the last trace of darkness." As they began to research ways to purify the town, they uncovered old texts mentioning a ritual that was rarely spoken of, known only as the Shattering. It was a ritual of last resort, meant to expel even the faintest remnant of a curse. But there was a reason it was rarely performed. The Shattering was dangerous, and even the slightest mistake could have catastrophic consequences. Eli felt the weight of the decision looming over him. They could risk the ritual and possibly end the curse once and for all, or they could leave Black Hollow and hope that the remnants would eventually fade on their own. But in his heart, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not when the town was still haunted by the shadows of its past. As night fell over Black Hollow once again, Eli and Evelyn prepared for the Shattering. They gathered in the same clearing where they had performed the severance ritual, the moon casting a pale glow over the woods. The air was thick with anticipation, and a tense silence settled over the forest as they began the ritual. They recited the incantations, their voices weaving together as they called upon the ancient forces to cleanse the town. The ground trembled beneath them, and the air crackled with energy. Eli felt a surge of power course through him, filling him with a strange sense of clarity. But as they reached the final verse of the incantation, a dark shape appeared at the edge of the clearing, a specter, darker and more menacing than the remnant Eli had seen the night before. It lunged at them, its hollow eyes filled with fury. Evelyn's voice faltered, but Eli gripped her hand, shouting the final words of the ritual with every ounce of strength he had. The air exploded with light, a blinding flash that drove the specter back, sending it shrieking into the darkness. When the light faded, the clearing was empty, and the oppressive weight of the curse finally lifted. They stood in silence, breathing heavily, their eyes scanning the forest for any sign of the shadows. But there was only stillness, a calm that felt deep and true. Evelyn turned to Eli, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. "It's over, this time." Eli nodded, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt since coming to Black Hollow. The shadows had been purged, and the remnants of the curse finally shattered. And as they walked back toward the town, Eli knew that Black Hollow was free, truly free, for the first time in centuries. End of episode 9.